Our business is joy. The hard work we do goes into building tiny machines of joy. We build, package, and ship joy. Our ultimate goal, regardless of how much we argue, stress, and struggle, and God knows we do, is to bring joy into the world. We are all part of the joy industrial complex. As game developers, the fruit of our labor is joy. If an industry can have a soul, ours is joy. So how can it be so hard? How can it be so hard sometimes to get up in the morning? How can it be so hard to keep a studio running, to find job security, personal health, or even a decent wage? How can it be so hard? And how can we make the struggle easier? We are fragile and frail people. Sometimes we fall, sometimes we fail. But we are also capable of deep compassion and sublime empathy. And we always aim for joy. My name is Henrik Jonsson, and I will be your moderator today. The questions asked here are what we will discuss during the panel. But first I need to address why the panel looks very different than planned. Tom Hall, the co-founder of id Software, and Nicole Lewis, head of publishing for League of Legends, were supposed to be here. They both had to cancel suddenly yesterday. Life comes at us hard. Thankfully, through friends and friends of friends, we have lined up a new set of panelists, and I would now like the panel to introduce themselves. Brie?
I'm Brie Code. I'm the CEO and creative director of a tiny studio based in Toronto called True Love. Before that, I was a lead programmer at Ubisoft Montreal on Child of Light and 3 Assassin's Creed projects, and before that, I wrote AI for a company of heroes at Relic.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. JC Lau. I'm currently a tech producer at Harebrained Schemes working on Battletech. Before that, I was at Bungie as a test engineer working on Destiny 2 and its DLCs. And before I entered games, I was a professor in the philosophy of race and gender at Virginia Tech.
Hello, my name is Osama Dorias. I'm a game designer at Warner Brothers Games in Montreal. I'm also the coordinator of the video game programs at Dawson College, and I'm the co-founder of the Montreal Independent Game Awards.
Hi, I'm Raph Koster, and I'm a game designer best known for MMOs, Ultima Online, Star Wars Galaxies, Metaplace, and I think this might be my 20th or 21st consecutive GDC.
It's a long run. So the first topic I'd like to bring up is my first job in games. Finding a job in games can be hard, but I also like to talk about how do we leave a job. I've seen too many developers leave a trail of burned bridges behind them. And I would like us to talk a little bit of how to leave. Could the panel please talk a little bit about how you got in, but also how you got out? If you have switched jobs since then, how did you leave? Any advice at all? Reverse the order, perhaps?
Sure. So I got in through friends, and I think that's not unusual. A friend of mine got lucky and landed a contracting job doing video games, and from there ended up hired full-time, and when they needed designers on Ultima Online, he recommended me. And there I ended up just ridiculously lucky on the right project at the right time. I think a lot of what I'd say about that is that luck needs preparation, right? If I hadn't been doing the right kind of thing beforehand, I probably couldn't have gotten the job. As far as leaving, gosh, most of the times I've left have been very, very stressful and unpleasant. I once left a job over the fact that I was asked to fire a group of people that I had been mentoring for 2 years, for example. And I wasn't allowed to tell them that's why. That was not fun. So.
So I actually had a completely different career path. I studied political science and I worked as a shipping agent, and I had a love-hate relationship with the job. Meeting people was fun, the captains and the crew, and doing the paperwork is boring. So I went to another love that I had before, which was graphic and web design, and I just completely self-taught. I became a freelancer. I did all the wrong things, didn't make a lot of money, but at least it allowed me to learn Flash, and Flash allowed me to make games, and my games were terrible, but they were good enough for a portfolio. That's how I landed my first job in the industry. I left that job because basically I was too nice, and I don't mean that in a good way. I didn't fight for my rights, I didn't fight for a salary, and I realized after years and years of just waiting patiently for people to acknowledge what I deserved and to give it to me, that people that were much more junior than me were actually making higher salaries. And when I asked to fix that, to mend that, I was given answers and excuses. So after 6 years of the same company, finally enough was enough. And by leaving, I almost made double what I made before. So it's basically that.
Okay, so the games industry is my third industry, I would say. So I'm Australian, and in Australia, you can do a law degree as an undergrad. So I actually started my college with an arts law degree, and I went on to become a lawyer. I worked in family law for several years, working on child representation in divorce cases, which is, as you can imagine, not a super fun place to be when you're 22 years old. Yeah, and then after that, I decided I wanted to be an academic, so then I did a dissertation in moral and political philosophy. So I ended up with a PhD in philosophy, and what do you do with that? You become a philosophy professor, because either that or there's that joke about going to McDonald's and asking people if they think they want fries with something. So when I was an academic, I was like, well, I have these skills, but I want to make games. How do I leverage my background into a games job? And so I actually applied at Bungie as a tester, and I'm like, I have a PhD, I would like to be a tester. And so that was a really interesting conversation, but I guess they gave me the job, so that's cool. And so a lot of it was talking about how those skills transferred. So I talked a lot about like how I have particular communication skills and organizational skills and how I could apply them to a particular role. And I can't say I've left a lot of games jobs because on this panel, I'm the baby on this panel. I've been in the industry for about 4 years. But although statistically, I'm 1 year away from the average career length for a woman in games, so let that sink in. But yeah, so one of the reasons I did leave was it was a combination of studio culture and also wanting to make an impact. And depending on your studio size and its composition, it can feel hard to make an impact. And so I wanted to go somewhere where I could feel like I was making a difference and being effective and seeing change that I wanted. So yeah, that's pretty much my story.
I got into the games industry by accident. I want to go all the way back to high school. I grew up in the country, and I hated living in the country. And I figured out by looking at what's possible in my high school that I could finish high school in 4 years instead of 5 if I moved some classes around in a way that my teachers didn't approve of, and took summer school. And the course is that's supposed to be remedial, but just take it. And they couldn't stop me. And so I finished high school when I was 16 and went to university with absolutely no savings because I never had a summer job and hadn't thought that far ahead. So I had to put myself through university by working 2 jobs and keeping my scholarship. And again, I kind of figured out how to make it work. And I thought, if I do computer science, I can get a degree and know I can keep my scholarship because it's not subjective. You just stay in the lab until your program works and you know you have an A, and then you know you have your scholarship and you know you have a degree. I graduated when I was 20 and the dot-com crash just happened and there were no jobs. And I realized I didn't want to be a programmer, and I hadn't thought that far ahead either. And I kept my student job for a while, and then I got a credit card. And I went to Europe I thought that like moving from the country to Vancouver had been so expansive and interesting that like going to another continent would be interesting too. And I thought I would figure out what I wanted from life and how, like, what like, should I go back to school and study, because I felt like I wanted to do a do-over. And then what I discovered was that I ran out of money and went back to Vancouver with $8 left and needed a job and started applying for every programming job I could find. And I was very, 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 very lucky to get a job at Relic Entertainment in Vancouver, which was an amazing experience. I loved it from the first few weeks, and I knew that I would stay in the games industry forever. So I wrote AI code there. I worked there for a while, but then I was like, I did want to like try to live overseas for a while, so I went to Australia for a bit. I came back to Canada. And then I started my own studio. And a couple of the times that I left studios, not all of them, one of those jobs was really amazing. All those jobs were amazing, but being a woman in a workplace dominated by men is not easy. And research shows if there's less than 30%, I think, women, then women get sidelined and stereotyped and talked over in meetings, and men attribute the women's ideas to themselves, and these kind of things really happen. And eventually you kind of reach a point where you are just not able to develop your talents and your aptitudes at the speed that the men around you are, and it makes more sense to go somewhere new. So that's why I left a couple of mine.
I'm coming at you from extreme privilege. As a programmer, I've never been afraid to leave the game industry, which is a blessing for that not many others and the specialists in the gaming field have. My first job in games was my first real job, if we did not count summer jobs. And it was as a programmer for games to be broadcast on TV. I failed my college, I did not know C++, and I lied to get in. I was asked to start in 3 weeks, and that's when I got my first book on C++. It worked out. It worked out. It was a different time. So if we talk about this first topic, and then if we try to think of one time where we realize that this is so bad, or so, so good, an opportunity on the outside. Sorry for making that sentence a complete mess. Have we ever had such a good situation and good offer from the outside that you need to leave, or was there ever a situation so bad that you felt you had to leave? And when my boss was screaming at me that she would kill me, that's when I left my first job. So, who would want to go first on that?
I don't mind. Do you want to go? So, let's see. My first job in games that I left, that would have been when I left Origin after making Ultima Online. I had come on board on Ultima Online when I was 23, 24. And after only a couple of years, I was actually the lead designer of it by the time I was 25, when it shipped. And I knew nothing about the wider industry at all. I didn't know anybody. I just didn't know anyone. I didn't know what I had actually accomplished. Like, I was oblivious to it. And I was highly opinionated, highly opinionated, very sure of myself in terms of what we were doing, but that meant that despite having just shipped this game that was a really big deal, and some of you are young enough to not even know how big a deal it was at the time. It was a really big deal, but I didn't realize how big a deal it was. EA actually put me on the list of people to be laid off because I was opinionated and thought that they were idiots in terms of what they were doing with online games. I got rescued by managers who, and I owe an enormous debt to people like Gordon Walton and Rich Vogel who mentored me through this period. But they launched an Ultima Online 2 project, and I was very carefully left out of the team for that. So they wouldn't let me lead a new project. They tucked me away on the live team, which turned out to be a blessing because the live team made the money and the sequels all got canceled. And eventually, part of the reason we left is that the follow-on project that I was working on also got canceled because they just didn't know what to do. So that ended up being good. We all left and landed a new one called Star Wars Galaxies. But it basically was a case of, wow, here's an org that is so dysfunctional that they don't understand where the money is coming from, where the value is coming from. They don't even understand this whole new category that they just opened up and is theirs for the taking, so they just let it wither on the vine. EA did go on to lose about $1 billion in online games in the space of the next 4 years, so leaving turned out to be the right thing to do. But it was a really strange experience to not be aware that I'd done something great, gradually become aware, and then be ignored for it by that company. And it's a good reminder that companies, even though they're often made of very smart people, companies can be really, really stupid things, like really, really stupid. So don't trust companies.
So I made the mistake at one point in my career where I started highlighting my soft skills as my strongest skills. This is actually true. They still are my strongest skills. I work really well with people. I even earned a reputation that I could work with anyone. For the record, I don't want to work with anyone, but I can if I had to. So I was hired in this one particular company that will go unnamed for the soft skills. I have hard skills as well, many of them. I have 12 years in the industry. I've shipped different sized games, over 20 of them. I have a track record for delivering. However, I focused on soft skills because I felt that this was something that was not favored in the industry. We don't look at it, we don't ask about it, and this is a mistake. People are promoted to positions of leadership based on their hard skills instead of being given other promotions that doesn't put them interfacing with people. So, like telling someone that you're working with, you're gonna kill them, or things like that. So what happened is, at this one particular company, I worked for a person who was a little bit manipulative, and by a little bit, I mean completely. He realized really quickly that I knew that my team liked me, they trusted me. So for the year or so that I was there, and don't go on my LinkedIn to find out which company I'm talking about, I was not able to change this person's mind once about anything, to the point that everyone has imposter syndrome. Mine went through the roof. And it was gradual. At first, it was like, okay, he's more experienced than me, and he's worked on more games, and he's dealt with more people, and I started listening. And then at other points when whatever he suggested would have a 50-50 track record of working, I started making excuses for it while we tried it out. And eventually, near the end, I realized I'm just a mouthpiece for my team. I'm a lead designer by name only. I'm not doing anything except translating, because he had lost all trust, or rather, the team had lost all trust in him. So I was being used as a figurehead. And that's when I decided to leave the company. That's not, my job title is not figurehead, it's game designer.
Okay, I'm going to preface this with also please don't go on my LinkedIn because my time in games has been relatively short, so it'll be really easy to pinpoint where things are happening. So I'm going to kind of couch this in very general terms. There was a point before I started in games proper when I was leaving academia where I did some work in both games journalism and also in working on consoles. So kind of games adjacent, not really in games. And one of the things that I discovered quite quickly, like Osama, is I had a particular set of skills that were easily transferable but were considered soft skills. So given my background, I've done a lot of advocacy work. I do a lot of speaking about diversity and inclusion. I have written and published on these areas. And very quickly on these teams that I was on, I became the person that was the one that would take things up to the manager on behalf of the team. So at one point, I was the coordinator for a team of 24 people. And they were all people and we were based in Seattle, but none of them were actually from Seattle. And for some of them, English was not their first language. So then I kind of ended up being like Osama the mouthpiece for this team. And I would bring things up to the manager, and it got to the point also for me where I was in this weird role where I had this particular set of coordination and like management skills. So I wasn't expendable in that way, but it was apparent that I was not included in a lot of the conversations at that leadership level. So it came to this point where they kind of just, I was getting siloed in a way that was not kind of making me effective for my team. And I like to say most people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And I think that is true in some of these cases. It's about those interpersonal relationships, and whether or not you can sustain them will also determine what your day-to-day is like. And I think that is one of the key things about how you can, like, why people leave is just, sometimes it gets too hard to try to maintain that relationship. Sometimes there's a lot of labor that you have to do in addition to your day job to maintain that relationship. And sometimes it's just not worth it. So if you get to that point where it's just basically your daily death by 1,000 cuts, it's probably time to leave. Yeah.
I was an AI programmer at Relic, and was a really technical programmer. Like, if someone can't figure out how to do something, they can give it to me and I'll figure it out. When I started at Ubisoft in Quebec, there is a stereotype that women make very good managers. So shortly after I started, my boss asked me to manage the team, and I had applied for a lead programmer position because it had been the only one that was on the website. And I was an intermediate programmer when I did that, so it's pretty cool. So I said yes, because of course I'm gonna take a promotion. And I'm not a good manager. It's not what maybe I'm an okay manager, but I'm a better systems programmer. But I said yes, and for the first 2 years it was really hard. Every time I had to speak in front of my team of 8 friends of mine, I would get the shakes and the stomachache, which I did every morning. And I managed that team, and then I managed a team that was twice that size, and then I managed a team that was 3 or 4 times that size, and then I became a lead programmer on Child of Light. And near the end of Child of Light, 2 things happened on that project. One was that I had a really incredible boss who knew that I wanted to be a producer, because I was so happy with getting the promotion and with feeling useful that I wasn't thinking about what I was actually good at or what I should be doing. I was doing what I was asked to do, and I really liked doing what I was asked to do. So he knew I wanted to be a producer, and so he showed me his entire job. He would be like, "Oh, Brie, come over here and see the resource management tool." And I was kind of horrified at what a producer's job was. And I realized I can't do, that's not my path. And what path have I been on for 5 years, 7 years? And near the end of that project, I also, we were shipping, we were crunching. And I discovered I had a life-threatening illness. And I couldn't tell them because they needed to stay focused. I blurted it out to my boss as he was putting a lot of pressure on me one day, and his eyes almost fell out of his head. I learned not to tell people that way. And then I went into surgery the day that we put the thing in the box and it was out, and the reviews came out that day. When I came out of surgery, the reviews were starting to appear on the internet. And it turned out that I was absolutely fine. The surgery worked, and I'm fine, and I'm completely fine. And but my life sure came into crystal clear focus, and I experienced something called post-traumatic growth, because I didn't know I was going to be fine. We were shipping that game, I didn't know what was going to happen, and so suddenly everything became really clear, and I knew where I wanted the industry to go, and I knew what was missing and what I wanted to do, and I started doing it, and I realized that organization wasn't the right place to be doing what I wanted to do, that innovation happens outside of established structures, and that it happens in a startup, and that I have to do a startup to be able to be doing what I want to do. So that's why I left.
We are talking about a little bit on skill set and finding out who we are as people when we grow into the industry. And I just met a game student at a university who was having issues with, or a bit of a problem with choosing if she wanted to go into 3D modeling or 3D animation. I couldn't help her with that because, you know, I'm a programmer. I'm so bad at drawing that I'm banned from using the whiteboard in many of our offices. But I was able to tell her that the choice we're making are very rarely career defining. It may influence her first job, but it will not necessarily influence her full career. And I wanted to tell her that you are not your career, you are not your job description. But, you know, I just don't think that quick on my feet. So I didn't. I wish I could. But I would like a little bit, if we can talk about how we change roles over time. Brie mentioned kind of a sliding into something because it's expected of you to be good at that because of different reasons, or how we move and change because we are curious and want to investigate things. So practical ways to broaden our horizons, basically. If anyone wants to take a stab at that, Brie?
So my boss on Child of Light taught me that in most setbacks there are opportunities. And it doesn't mean that the setback is fair. It doesn't mean it's how it should work. But it means that the game has changed, and you can sometimes find new ways to play from that. And I think that, you know, every time that something's gone wrong in my career, maybe I haven't known at that moment that it's actually a push forward, and it hasn't felt good in the moment, but it's always worked out to be a giant leap forward. When I was doing AI programming at the beginning, it was because that's what the team needed, and then I really liked it. And then when I became a manager, it was because it was what the team needed. And even if it wasn't the best long-term career path for me, it taught me how to be able to do stuff like this. Speak in front of people, and even just speak to people at all, because I was never very social. And then when I, got sick and figured out what I wanted to do, I discovered a theory in the field of stress psychology, which kind of explains why about half of people find video games boring, and also suggests a framework for how to engage and retain those other half of people, which is the basis of my studio now. The thing about not being your job, though, it doesn't work for me. We're all different people, and we all have different needs, and work-life balance has never been something I've needed. So I'll throw that out there, and it's not popular, and don't follow my example, because you probably need a work-life balance.
So I think the thing about not being your job or not being your job description is kind of apt. Okay, so given my background, and I like to joke about this because just as a bit of background, I come from a really kind of traditional Asian parenting stereotype thing, and I meet that trifecta because I'm a doctor, a lawyer, and an engineer. And so my parents love that, and then I'm a game producer, and they're like, what is that? But one of the things is, while I am all those things, I also am more things than that, but I'm not just those things, but there are skill sets that overlap for all those things. And I like to talk about skill sets more than job descriptions for two reasons. One is job descriptions vary wildly between studios. So this is also true of titles. This is true of like, what your day-to-day looks like. And the other thing is skill sets are pliable, and you can leverage those for a lot of jobs. So like when we were talking about soft skills, those are necessary for any kind of, like there's a set of soft skills including like communication and organization and being able to work in a team and having some sort of initiative that are relevant for basically all game jobs where you work in a collaborative environment. So talking about those is, I think, a more kind of vague but useful way of describing yourself. And the other thing about so this is going back to what Henrik was saying about how you change those roles over time. There are things that you can care deeply about that don't fall within a job description. So like for me, I care really deeply about diversity and inclusion issues. And I can't go to a studio and be like, hey, I care deeply about diversity and inclusion, give me a games job. That's changing now because studios are getting D&I managers, but like that's not really super common right now. So I can't just be like, hey, I care about this stuff, get me a job. So a lot of it is making spaces and carving out those careers for yourself, I think. So one of the things I did was I have this particular interest, and when I was at Bungie, I found a way to have conversations about diversity and inclusion with initially my manager, and then the head of my discipline, and then it went all the way up to the studio leadership, and this is how we founded the Bungie Diversity Committee in 2017. Our studio at the time was kind of having these conversations, so it was kind of also lucky that I could just kind of segue into that. But there are ways to have these conversations about what you care about and to carve out those spaces for yourself. I think one of the things that also helps is because our industry is young and we still have a lot of technology that's developing, there are spaces to find, nothing's being done in this particular area, how can I get into that space? Or, there's this new tech that we haven't really explored. How can I leverage my expertise to kind of develop that? And we have these opportunities, so yeah, we should take those.
Okay. So professionally speaking, who you are, it's what you do. And you're able to do whatever you want. And I proved that myself because I didn't study anything related to game design at all. So who I was professionally, again, was a shipping agent. But I was only a shipping agent for a year until I decided to explore other things. And then I picked up other skills. Your skills are malleable and intangible, but you can pick them up. And then I became a freelance graphic and web designer, and that became who I was. And that's what I thought, at least. But that wasn't what was important. The title wasn't what was important. It was the skills that I carried over. However, people only interface with, titles. So when I became a game designer, it's because I transitioned from the graphic and web design skills, added a few other skills that were unrelated, and now all of a sudden I have new skills. I mentioned before I was a coordinator of the video game programs at Dawson College. Before I was a coordinator, I was a teacher. I became a teacher of level in video game design when I only had 3 years of experience. How did that happen? I was interested in becoming a teacher, but I knew it was probably going to be along a faraway road. I was still very new to the industry, but some people saw that I had some potential. I don't have stage fright. That's one thing. I like spending time with people, even if I'm not paid for it, so I could spend more time with the students and get them to the level that they are. I have these skills that I learned when I was a shipping agent before that I carried over again. So all I had to do was leverage that when an opportunity came. And the opportunity came in the form of a teacher that canceled 3 weeks before a class was supposed to start. So I had to teach, or rather, they were looking for someone to teach nonlinear narrative design in the Dragon Age engine 3 weeks away when nobody in Montreal knew that engine. And so I had 3 weeks to apply and potentially possibly get the job. But I couldn't wait to get the job to learn the engine. So I had to start learning the engine beforehand. And I didn't have time off to take from work, so this was part-time. So I had a full-time job in the day. But I did it because this was an opportunity and I really wanted it. And also, I don't need work-life balance and don't follow my example. I don't sleep much. So I did it, and I got that job. And I performed fairly well. I had pretty good evaluations. So when the time came for the coordinator of the level design program, because this was a level design program, to step down, they looked at who had really good evaluations, and they offered it to two of us. The first person declined, and I accepted, except with an asterisk. I love level design. I was a game designer when projects were really small. So when you did everything, you weren't specialized at all. I did AI and UI and level design and mission design and name it, I did it. Economy design, things that, narrative, things that on the chart now, people are surprised that the same person can do them. That's another problem of the industry that I won't go into. But you can do them. You can do all these things. Basically, for me, I approached game design no matter what, like telling a story, whether it's economy design or narrative design. So I just leverage skills. So what happened is, I wanted to have a game design program. They didn't have one. And they said that they're not willing to hire someone to create the curriculum. So I said, okay, I will. But I didn't study education. I didn't even know what a curriculum looked like. And they said, how are you going to do this? And I said, well, I'm going to approach it the same way I approach game design. I look at games, I reverse engineer, I write my documents, I proceed, we make mistakes, we iterate, and then we'll have something that works. It's easy, right? Well, no, it's not. It's hard, but I mean, the thought process behind it is easy. So the director said, fine, we'll give you an example curriculum. This is what it looks like. See ya. 6 months later, I booked a meeting, and he was surprised to see me. I had a curriculum for a game design program because I spent the time to do it. He was surprised because he thought he would never see me again. That was the end of that, you know. But what happened is he looked at it, I actually put effort. I'm not, at this point, I think I had 5 years of experience in the industry, so I didn't take it upon myself. I got a lot of people to come and consult, and we worked on it together, and I credited them for it. And technically, I had all the language wrong, but the work was there. He assigned me a technical writer for a week. She helped me fix it. And we had a program. I pitched it to the Ministry of Education. I prepared for weeks. I was sweating bullets. They asked me the most basic questions you could imagine, like, what is game? So they accepted it because, you know, this is my expertise. And the part that they see as the needed skills, they don't know if I have it or not. They see end results. And all of a sudden, I became a coordinator. In addition to becoming a designer, in addition to becoming a teacher, in addition to becoming a shipping agent, in addition of becoming a graphic web designer. And now, tomorrow, if I want it to be something else, all I have to do is look at the skills that I already have. Did I mention I was also the co-founder of the Montreal Independent Game Awards, which is a festival, so I'm also an event planner. And the skills that I needed to learn that I didn't have as a game designer to become an event planner were actually really small, because planning events is very similar to planning a game or, you know, leading a team. So who you are is really who you want to be. Don't let titles stop you.
I'm not sure what to say after that. When Henrik wanted titles for the slide for, you know, say what you do, a few years ago I just started saying, just put down game designer. Just put that down, because, you know, I've been a CEO. I was a vice president of Disney. Whatever. There's like 100 of them, so it's not as big a deal as it seems. I've done art. You can actually go on Spotify right now and stream my folk music album I put out in 1999. Like, for real, it's out there. You know, when I was a kid, my parents and my family used to say, oh, you'll grow up and be a writer and a teacher. I think I actually did end up doing both those things. The reason why I make games is because it lets me do everything. Right? I make games because it lets me do art. It lets me play with math. I can do some programming. I can sometimes write the soundtrack music. I get to read about and then talk about ethics and philosophy and try to persuade people in the industry to pay attention to ethics. I'm not being so successful on that front, but I keep trying. You know, I get to work and help manage communities, and, you know, the list goes on and on and on. And, you know, in the end, to me, it all ends up being wrapped up in game designer, because It's just aspects of the job, one way or another. I probably, if I made a large enough pile of money, I have to admit I'd probably get in a van and go tour the country with an acoustic guitar. But, I mean, literally my degree, the thing that I left behind to go make Ultima Online was actually a Master of Fine Arts in writing poetry. I think, the who are you thing is really that all of us are many people. We're different people depending on who we're talking to. We're different people depending on the situations we're put in. And the key to it is really to not stand still, to keep looking for new ways to dig into yourself and new ways to dig into the world around you and find fresh new combinations. Oh my God, I guess people are match 3 puzzles. Yeah, I mean, see? So that's, game designer, yeah.
That's amazing.
The path we travel is very weird, and what I meant with you are not your job description is, or your career, is that I'm still the little fat kid, or rather tall fat kid who just got out of that jock hole I was living in and making something a lot different than what they could even imagine. So, we're different things, we're amazing beings. So, but we also have friends, local and international friends, and we meet through a multitude of channels. And, we hang out on Twitter and we like each other's posts on Instagram and put bunny ears on each other on different types of Snapchattery apps. And many times we prefer the company of others who are not game developers, but we all build our own networks to get by and feel safe, feel strong, and grow as people. And I think Raph, I'm sorry,
I take Rafe, particularly from non-Americans. It is a common nickname, actually.
But I'll try with Raph.
Yeah.
Raph.
You'll see why in just a second.
So, and of course we meet at GDC and we listen to colleagues, friends, or total strangers opening their hearts to share hard-earned experiences. Most of us have support networks like this, and I know that Raph had input.
Do any of you know my name? Like my actual name? No? Rafael Ricardo Koster Villanueva. Soy latino, de familia puertorriqueña. My family is Puerto Rican on my mom's side. Nobody has a clue. Nobody knows that. Raph Koster sounds like some kind of, some Dutch German, which is in there, and like I'm an 8th Irish too, and whatever. I grew up in New York, Massachusetts, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Peru, Barbados, Haiti, and Maryland before the age of 18. So I really hate it when somebody says, "Where are you from?" There's this thing called third culture kid, which is people like me, and there's probably a bunch of you here actually. We are the people who grow up without living in any one culture long enough to feel as it is your own. Like, yes, I have an American passport, but I had lived like in raw time before I was 18. I did not grow up American. I went to a British school system. I grew up speaking other languages. I completely missed the NES. Like, just skipped it. It wasn't a thing, right? That can leave you feeling anchorless sometimes, right? on the negative side. On the positive side, it can make you feel like you live everywhere and like all cultures are wine in different bottles, right? It can leave you feeling like there's profound similarities and that the similarities are far bigger than the differences. When I got into games, it was, and specifically when I got into games, it was online games. And back then, not that many people were online, and it was a crazy kind of a melting pot, right? There were all sorts of people. One of my friends on one of the early tech smuds was one of the world's top expert in grasshoppers, right? Like you'd meet people, because it was a tech smud. Another player was blind, but he could play a game with a screen reader, even back then in the early 90s. When I got into the game industry, that sense of shared experience of this games and game playing being a common culture was important, but not just the larger game, the game playing culture, but the game making culture turned out to be a family for me. The most impactful thing probably in my whole career was not a job. It was not a game title. It was when one of my bosses at the time, Gordon Walton, he called me into his office to do a one-on-one because he'd just become the manager of the team, and he said, "Hey, so how are things going? What are you up to?" I said, "I'm working. You should know that. You're my boss." And he said, "Oh, well, are you happy here?" I was like, "There are other places?" "Yeah, no, there's a whole industry out there." "Oh, they don't know who I am. That's ridiculous." He said, "What are you talking about?" "Of course they know who you are." "No, nobody's ever tried to recruit me. People here won't promote me. I don't think anybody cares about anything I say or do, honestly, And he said, "Wow, what are you doing next week?" And I said, "Working. You should know this. You're my boss." And he said, "No, you're not." And he bought me a plane ticket, and he flew the two of us to Oregon, where Chris Crawford was holding a game design retreat at his house. And he sat me down in front of this house next to Steve Moretsky, Noah Falstein, Bob Bates, Brian Moriarty, and said, "This is your group. These are your peers. These are the people that think the way you do, that love games the way you do. And that's why this is my 20th or whatever consecutive GDC. Because frankly, the execs at whatever, they come and go, right? But I still have dinner with those guys every year, right? Because, the business people, they make their pile of money, and they leave. And it's just as well, right? But these people, right? That's the family. That's what actually makes the difference through all the shit. Because there's plenty of shit.
There is plenty of shit. I'm going to have to cut it a little bit short. I'm sorry for cutting in now. We're just running a little bit short on time. I'd like to mention that yesterday I had a dinner with my peers, my friends from Ironstorm in Dallas, where we made Anachronox, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing to get 5 people together after almost 20 years together every year at GDC. Those are my people. That's why I wasn't at the Nordic party. Suck it. I wanted to touch on organization a little bit, because I think it's very important. For the long-term health and sanity of our industry, I firmly believe we game developers need to make deeper efforts in order to improve our working conditions. We have seen a terrible year of layoffs. We have seen studios shut down or decimated by forces seemingly beyond our control. Our business is very cyclical. Companies might need to adjust to handle shifting circumstances, But the effect of those adjustments, that are often called layoffs, end up on the shoulders of game workers and their families. So can we just do a real quick, and seems severely disrespectful, but a quick panel thought on the recent year, what it means for the future, and how it can be combated. That was hard to say. That was easy to write. Combated. How we can fight it. Anyone?
I can start. Okay, so like I said, I'm the baby on this panel. I have not been in the industry for that long. But I entered the industry after, I'm not even going to say, but the thing about ethics in game journalism. I entered the industry like knowing that there have been series of layoffs. I entered the industry after knowing that this place is unstable and basically just bananas. Like, how does anything ever even get made in games? And so I know that there is this anxiety that comes with making games. And I think the thing that keeps us going is that element of solidarity. We plan, we know that these things are going to happen, and we plan for them. We try to make contingencies. And I'm going to keep this short. I'm also an elder millennial, so I love social media. And I think that being able to hear these stories and speak to the people who are directly experiencing these things is really important for like us being aware of what's going on in our industry and being able to connect to groups that can help us support each other is really, really important. So I guess for the future, I want to see more of those connections being made. I want to see us be able to connect and strengthen those connections as we make them, because I think ultimately it's one of those situations where a rising tide lifts all boats. We need to be able to support each other and know that like when other people are suffering and be able to help them alleviate that. And that's what's going to keep us all together. So.
Can I add something? Really quickly, most of us are good people who care about others. That's been my experience every company. I've worked at 5 different companies. Most of us are good. Making a concerted effort to identify the people who care about others, who are not here only for the paycheck or the bonus, and help them in any way that you can. And build trust between each other and identify the people who are not that. Our industry is very finite. We cannot have infinite jobs. So why are we accommodating people who only care about themselves? We have a problem with who we promote to leadership positions. Most of our directors are actually dictators. And we need to stop that. Who is more powerful, one director or everyone under him combined? I said him, I meant them, sorry. Who? A director cannot do anything if we're united. So identify the good people, please. Form a strong partnership, and then we have power. Otherwise, we're complicit. Thank you.
So, the path forward in our industry of joy is crooked and winding, and we frequently find ourselves in forks in the path. Our choices matter, and our landscape is ever-shifting. From my view, the business of joy is a magical place. But not all magic is good for us. Empathy, curiosity, and compassion are our most transferable skills, so please let's use them. We will close this panel now with a few choice words from our panelists. Thank you so much.
Those were my choice words.
Nice.
Innovation happens outside of what we already know. And new audiences and new technology are the two kind of places we can look to innovate. Underrepresented people have a hard time in our industry. There are real problems that we can all work together to solve and be curious about why they're happening and have clear eyes and look at how they happen and fix them together. But there is something else that is true, and I'm sorry to everyone who's not underrepresented to break this news to you. But if you have a unique perspective that has not been explored by the industry yet, and if you manage to build a degree of expertise by going through a lot of shit, your ideas are probably more valuable than those of your peers. Because you are the one who's going to do something that is new and opening up a new audience. It's not fair. It's true, though.
Okay. So, as probably one of those people, there's been so many times where I've been the one, like, fill in the blank, whatever you want to say, in the meeting room or in the studio or in my team. So, and I think that one thing that we're starting to realize now is that those people have always been there. And the face of the industry is not your, sorry, cis-het white dudes, but it's not just you. And so I think it's important to recognize that and to lift those people up, because we've always been here. And sometimes doing that will mean, actually not sometimes, basically every time you do that, that means you're challenging an existing norm. And it can be scary to challenge an existing norm. So be brave, do those things, like, amplify those people. And that's, I think, what we need to do to make us all collectively better. So yeah, that's what I got.
For me, games have always been about connecting people, connecting ideas. They're the things that I would hand out to my classmates at recess because I didn't speak their language well enough, but we could do that together. And to me, the industry and then the colleagues and the rest are about connecting. I think we're always just stronger when we come to understand one another and understand our similarities and differences. So that, to me, is at the heart of this. It's at the heart of what we do. So, I guess I'd just say go out there and go do that.
Another point?
Yeah, if you...
We got time.
Oh, we got
Okay.
3 more minutes.
I did want to mention something, a thought that I had before. Not an ending statement, but it's a clarification. I was very privileged throughout my career. I was given a lot of opportunities, and I was able to fill them and get these jobs. I wasn't implying that all you have to do is work hard and things will be showered your way. Everyone's situation is different. What I was implying is that nothing is stopping you from acquiring skills. You don't need to have that. There are no barriers to acquiring the skills if you know where to look. So reach out. Damn, that is a terrible thing to say because it's absolutely not true. Can I reset and start over?
Got it.
You're not what you studied, assuming that you even had the privilege to study. You have a lot of potential. However, not everyone's privilege is equal. So be mindful of that and keep just trying to push a little bit more. That's it. Thank you.
Can I add one more thing to that? The most inspiring advice anyone ever gave me in my career was when I said that, because I was complaining to a friend that, someone was getting ahead who didn't deserve it, and I saw someone else who really deserved it, but who was a woman not getting ahead, and I said that she will get ahead in the end. In the end, it will catch up to him. And my friend said to me, no, it won't. He will fail up. And he will fail up and up and up. And you need to set different targets to compare. And my life is really easy. My life has been really easy. My career in the games industry has been pretty easy compared to everyone else who I graduated with. So when I compare my opportunities to the guys that I work with, I get frustrated. But when I compare my opportunities to many other people I know, I realize how easy it has been. And it has to be about something it's about, can I achieve what I want to achieve and what I'm capable of in a realistic framework of what's possible?
Okay, we're coming up on 59.8 on my clock here, so I guess we don't have time for questions from the audience, even though we would love them. I'm trying to see any time, if there's any police here.
Oh, no.
No, okay, so let's wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming. If you do want to grade this or give us some kind of feedback on the website, I'm not fully sure how that works. Please remember that Tom Hall and Nicole Lewis, who had to be yanked out of here on very short notice, will get tagged if you do that. Give us any bad feedback.
Yeah.
So please give feedback, but be mindful so we don't splash our stuff on other people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.